Greetings, brothers and sisters. Hello and welcome back to Eva's House of Spirit. I'm Eva, and in this video I want to talk about psychological triggers in magic, in magical work. What they are, why they can be helpful. I just want to talk about psychological triggers because I really don't hear a lot of people talking about this subject. Usually, when you look into the subject of triggers, you find one of two things where psychology and or emotions sort of are involved. You either hear about the negative sort of triggers, or things that bring you back to trauma, or you hear about psychological triggers as they relate to, let's say, the marketing field and how people want to psychologically affect you into buying a product or patronizing their business. But we're not going to talk about that kind of stuff. I'm going to discuss how psychological triggers play a role in magic. And if you've been following this channel, you may have realized that over time, here and there, I will mention, such and such can be a great psychological trigger for blah, blah, blah. That's because I do believe in the power of psychological triggers. I do believe that they are that they very much can affect the work that we do. Psychology can have a powerful effect on magic, because the mind is such a primary magical tool, and I do feel that we can definitely use our own psychology to our own advantage in our pursuit of magical practice. Now, first, I do want to just make it clear, I am not an expert on psychology. I am not a psychologist. So do take the things I'm saying with a grain of salt, of course. Do understand that I'm not coming from some stance like, oh, I got it all figured out and I know everything from A to Z, because that's not where I'm coming from. And I also want to make it clear that I'm not saying here that magic is 100% psychological, but we do know that psychology, it is a valid thing. And being that in working magic, we are pursuing a process where command of reality begins in the mind, wouldn't it make sense then to know thyself, and in so doing then to utilize the psyche as a means to kickstarting the process of intentionally affecting reality? That's the direction I'm coming from. Now, as I stated before, when I mentioned that usually you hear about triggers in reference to the negative sorts of triggers that kind of bring you back to places of trauma emotionally and mentally, I do want to say, although in psychology, from what I understand, the term trigger seems to have a negative connotation in that triggers are often associated most with the reactivation of thoughts and or feelings related to experiences of trauma, a trigger doesn't necessarily have to be something that affects you in a bad way. A trigger is something that affects you in any number of ways, depending on your psychology, and depending upon what exactly the trigger is in relation to your life experience. That's something also that I do suggest keeping in mind. When I speak of triggers, I'm not speaking of things that necessarily will push you over the edge into some bad headspace or emotional place. Anything we use or work with in magic that is on the physical level, here in the physical plane, these are often referred to as focal points when experienced practitioners say you don't need tools, tools are only focal points. These are focal points, and yet while these physical things are focal points, the focal points we use also have a psychological impact upon us. They do affect us in various ways. Before I continue, I would like to touch upon something that was stated on a website that I did consult, because I was kind of like consulting websites in terms of the concept of triggers and what they are and so on and so forth. According to psychcentral.com, in an article titled "What is a Trigger?", it was stated there that triggers are very personal. Different things trigger different people. A person's triggers are activated through one or more of the five senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, or taste. So, things on the physical level, triggers, affect us in sensory ways, and those sensory experiences translate into various psychological sort of interpretations. Yes, physical things, they do have their own vibrations and energies, but until those things are used in particular ways, those items remain just items. Take a candle, for example. A candle has color, texture, energy, vibration, etc. But by itself, it's only a candle. When we use a candle in a certain deliberate context, it takes on a specific meaning, and that meaning has a sway over our psyches, which then activates our consciousness in a particular way, and our thus influenced state of consciousness then in turn may influence the energy that doesn't just comprise ourselves, but also comprises other things. Think scientifically here. What I'm talking about is that if you break down everything in existence, everything essentially is energy at its most basic level. And I've said it in the past, somewhere in my other videos, once or twice, maybe a few times. We and everything that exists, we all came from the same source. Whether you believe that source is a creator, a divine creator, or whether you believe that odds are that the scientific theory of the singularity out of which, the Big Bang took place and all that jazz happened, whichever way you believe, we still, energetically speaking, we still came from the same source point. We share energy with everything that exists in our reality. So when we change or affect or manipulate our own energy, we thus can set in motion the manipulation of energies in the world that we inhabit, in the reality that we inhabit. You move energy with energy. The most accessible point to affecting change is to begin with the self, to create ripples that ripple outward and then affect other things and other people. So that's why I'm saying psychological triggers matter. They are sort of like the little nudging point in the domino the domino effect of how we sort of get the ball rolling, or how we can anyway. Now, another point that I do want to touch upon is that symbolism and association are at the core of psychological triggering. They're very much connected and central, connected with and central to psychological triggering. And that is why I often speak about the symbolism of things that we might do or use in our work. Symbolism and association are very strong keys to communicating messages to our subconscious minds, and the messages we internalize can then have profound effects on the realities we create, as I just described when I was talking about the candle being just a candle, until you actually use it in a particular context, as a particular focal point, using it in a way that does trigger your psyche into a certain headspace, trigger you into a certain emotional place, and so on and so forth, to get that domino effect going in terms of magic. So it all comes down to when you are working particular techniques, or when you are working with particular things, when you are faced with the questions of associations or of symbolism. If you find yourself saying, like, I don't know the symbolism or associations of a particular thing or of a particular action, it all comes down to some questions you need to ask yourself. You know, it takes some introspection. You may want to ask yourself, like, what does this particular thing mean to me? How does this particular thing make me feel? What headspace does this particular thing put me in? When I think of this particular thing, what immediately comes to mind? You know, what ideas are most closely associated with this thing? Those are questions you can ask yourself to help yourself to unravel symbolism and association relating to things. And when you do that, it can help you to select appropriate triggers in your work. And all of this is an integral part of how more experienced practitioners will often say, like, do what feels right. Intuitively, usually you will be drawn toward things that trigger you in the right ways, and you will know what to avoid, what triggers you in the wrong ways. Now, furthermore, in chaos magic, belief is a powerful tool, because belief itself is a powerful component in the psychological triggering process. Think about it. Something must mean something to you and have a sway over you in order to stir you in a certain way. And without certain beliefs in regard to certain things, those triggers, you know, those things will lack context and thus cannot act as appropriate triggers. So what I'm trying to say is, without your beliefs, one way or another, that will color how you view various things, various actions, words, etc. Without those beliefs you have, there's no context. You know, so what you believe is important. That empowers the triggers that you will utilize, you know? I hope that makes sense. And essentially, in what I am saying here, this is why I feel that you shouldn't just blindly believe things that are drummed into you, or you shouldn't just blindly do what other people, you know, tell you is right, okay? And I'm using the term shouldn't here as a suggestion. Things hold different meanings for different people, and thus things will trigger different people in different ways. So if said people are magical practitioners, the things that trigger them uniquely will also act differently in affecting the magical operations of said people versus other people. What I mean is, what may trigger me appropriately may not trigger you appropriately, and vice versa. So that's why it's important to acknowledge in magic it's different strokes for different folks, and that's why you should do what feels right. And that's why, and again, I'm saying should as a suggestion here, not like you must, but you know, that this sort of puts everything into sort of context, you know. The mind, it is I think a very significant part of what makes us each as individuals who we are. The mind can be a powerful thing. The mind can, if utilized correctly, and if it is in a healthy state, you know, it can be an amazing I think catalyst is the right word, an amazing catalyst for positive change in one's life and in one's reality, you know, to create one's life in the way that one wishes to create it. But on the flip side, I will also say that the mind can be a tricky thing too. And while I am encouraging that, you know, you all might think about this, consider, you know, your own psychological triggers, consider what you use as focal points, consider how you utilize external stimulus, external stimuli to sort of click yourself into where you need to be to get those, again, to get that domino effect going in terms of magical operation. I will say, if you're going to get a little crazy experimental with this, like if you're going to really push the limits, you know, really push the boundaries of your psyche, I do advise being careful with that, because sometimes if you go in and you start poking around in unsafe ways or too deeply, you could have some not so desirable things happen, you know. So if you're gonna really push the limits of this, really take it like from 0 to 60, I do advise maybe it's a good idea to consult with a psychologist or a therapist on the side, just for safety's sake. But if you're going to approach this on a more face value level, not really like delve into like the deep dark recesses of your mind, well, I'm sure you'll probably be okay without that, without consulting with a professional, but just do proceed with caution. This is all I want to suggest. So for now, I think this is pretty much the extent of my video. There is a book that I do want to recommend. I mentioned here in this video, before I wrap this up, I did mention that the things we use physically in our work are essentially focal points and or triggers. Well, yeah, I would say they are focal points and triggers, and that they are not necessary. I really do believe that, you know, tools and ingredients and all that jazz and doing the hokey pokey, magically speaking, it's not all necessary. You know, it's nice to do if you feel connected to that, if that triggers you in the correct ways. But if you're interested maybe in exploring the idea, the concept, the process of casting without tools, in sort of freeing yourself from the connection to, or the reliance on, I should say, focal points, psychological triggers, external physical things in order to affect changes in reality through will, you might want to check out this book. I'm still reading it, so I can't really give an accurate review, but the book is Instant Magic by Christopher Penczak. That's the book. So basically, this book is about casting without tools. Here's a passage that sort of captures what this book is about. The spells of instant magic are not your typical pagan or ceremonial spells. They don't involve complicated rituals. They don't involve altars and magical tools. You don't need candles, special ingredients, or exotic symbols. I love those spells and I've used them before and will use them again. But there are many times in life when you need to tap into your energetic awareness and create change. You can't always get to your altar, and many times you need magic in your car, at work, or on the run. The spells here are accessible at any time through meditation, visualization, words, and intent. I will say though, even though in this book the shift is sort of away from, you know, and in many ways, a lot of times practitioners who practice magic without tools or ingredients, the shift is away from, let's say, like candles, crystals, herbs, you know, oils, all that kind of stuff, And it does move sort of more into the realm of visualization, emotion, maybe some words, possibly some things that you do. But excuse me. Oh my god, I burped. But at least the shift from external trigger to internal trigger, to external, oh my god, at least the shift from external triggers to internal ones that you have command over, that you can control, use at will at any time, that is something that might be a little more useful in certain situations to you. So with that said, I'm going to wish you blessed be and ashe. I hope this video has given you some things to think about. If you have any questions, thoughts, feelings, anything in regard to this, if you have anything you'd like to bring forth or share or anything you'd like to chime in, I do welcome that. And I do wish you all a wonderful night. And until next time, until our next exchange, you stay awesome. And bye-bye for now.